Welcome to the Invest Brilliantly broadcast, where we passionately endorse note investing as a brilliant way to create passive cash flow for you and your family and complete financial freedom. I am Desi Arnaz, your host for today's broadcast. And today we're going to be talking about a topic that's pretty near and dear to my heart because it's kind of how I cut my teeth in the world of investing, and that is called seller financing. And that's what we're going to cover today. And I'm going to share with you guys some stories about some of the things I've done in the past and show you some of the pluses and some ways to sell the seller financing idea and how you can use seller financing to create a fabulous real estate investment portfolio. As you guys know, I don't generally talk about investing in actual bricks and mortar. I mean, I talked about that for 30 plus years, but about 6 years ago, I started investing in paper. But I see the two of these as coming together. Plus, I've since come around to the thinking that it's probably not a bad idea for people to have paper and bricks and mortar. Yeah, if you have a really good performing brick and mortar asset, why not hold on to it? And if you can also supplement that with some good performing cash flow paper, then that you got the best of both worlds. So that's kind of where my head is now, my thinking. Personally, I don't plan to buy any additional real estate, but I do plan to, if I have to foreclose on someone and I wind up with some real estate, I do plan to use that to create some paper like I'm going to share with you guys today. So I have a question for you guys. Have you ever done a seller financed deal? Type it in the comments for me if you have some experience with seller financing. And I'm going to go ahead and move on here and let's start our show. This is our Facebook Live today. And as I said, we're going to talk about seller financing. And so here's what I want to share with you guys about seller financing. Oh, one thing before we do that. I want to ask you guys to share and like this program. If you have people out there that you think might be interested in learning something about seller financing so they can buy more real estate, then share this program because this is going to be very informative. Invite them to come on to this live right now. Do that if you can. All right. So I believe one of the very best ways to understand real estate investing in general and specifically seller financing is to look at a scenario. There's something about walking people through a scenario that creates clarity. And so that's what I want to do here. And so I've created a couple of fictitious characters. One is called Sauls Seller and the other is Betty Buyer. So Barbara Buyer, I'm sorry. We're going to take a look at that. So let's just talk about Sauls Seller today. Sauls Seller wants to sell his house. He needs to sell his house. He's got things going on and he needs to move on. But he's having trouble selling it. Maybe it's selling too slowly. Maybe he can't get the price he wants. Maybe it's in a neighborhood where, there's just not that much demand. But for whatever reason, he needs to get this property sold and he needs to get it sold as quickly as possible. And so an option for Saul is to put his property on the market and offer seller financing. Now, what does that mean? That means that the buyer of his property will not have to go to a bank or mortgage company to get their financing. Literally, all they have to do is put their down payment down and Saul will let them pay him by the month. Don't get this confused, though. The people do actually buy the house. They're not renting it. They own it. And Saul has stepped away from the role of ownership. It's a pretty nice little feature, a great way to buy houses. Back in the early 80s, when I started in the real estate business, I bought my first investment property in 1982, and I bought a bunch of them throughout the 80s. But when I started in real estate in 1980 as a real estate agent, the very first house I ever sold was to a guy who had retired, just got out of the service. He didn't retire, but he had just gotten out of the military, and he wanted to buy his own house. Well, at that time, the interest rates were 17.5%. Now, I don't know about you, but I found that a lot of people couldn't afford to buy a house at 17.5%. And so as a real estate agent, I got into the business when a lot of people were getting out. And I very quickly realized I have to do something different, because if I have to try to find people who want to buy a house and then they got to pay 17.5% interest or 15% interest or anything like that, they're not going to buy. And that's exactly what was going on. People were putting houses on the market and they were not selling. And so after a while, there became the big fad was gurus going all around the country teaching real estate agents about something they call creative financing. And that's how I cut my teeth. And that's why I said seller financing is kind of near and dear to my heart, because most of the real estate that I purchased during the 80s and most of the real estate that I sold as a real estate broker through my Century 21 franchise, and most of the real estate that was sold by the agents that worked for my franchise were sold with seller financing. So we did a lot of seller financing deals. In fact, when I sold my franchise and I moved to California, the first, I don't know, 3 or 4 houses I purchased out here were also done with seller financing. Even though the real estate agents out here told me nobody out here does seller financing. The most recent seller finance deal that I did was in, I think it was in 2001, maybe 2002. No, wait a minute, it was later than that. 2007, I purchased a property with seller financing in Riverside County. And so I know that people will do this. You just have to show them the benefits. So what we're going to do now is take a look at Saul, the seller. He needs to sell, and we have a solution. And by the way, the solution I'm going to share with you would work just as well if you're an investor buying or if you are buying a house to live in. So keep that in mind, because you can do both. And I certainly have done both. So now I want to introduce you to Barbara Buyer. Barbara Buyer is a person who has $10,000 to put down on the house that she wants to buy. She can afford $1,000 a month. But the problem is she doesn't quite qualify for bank financing. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that she's got horrible credit. Okay, there are a lot of reasons that you might not fit into that bank financing box, right? Banks have a tiny little box, and you've got to fit into that box if you want to get their money. For example, Barbara could be an attorney who's only been out of law school for 18 months. And, you got to have 2 years in your own business in order to get financed at a bank. Who knows? That could be her scenario. Maybe her credit score is a 639, but you need a 640 in order to get the financing. I mean, it doesn't mean she's a deadbeat. It just means she missed the box by 1 point, right? I mean, there are things like that that happen in people's lives. Maybe she's changed jobs 2 or 3 times in the past 2 years. Each time might be an upgrade, but she makes lenders nervous because she's not that stable, okay? And so things like that cause Barbara not to be what we call in the business bankable, right? If any of you guys have ever seen situations like that where people really are good people, but they're not bankable, make a comment on that or give me a thumbs up. I mean, there's plenty of stories like that. I've certainly seen plenty of them myself. So that's the scenario. Saul needs to sell and Barbara wants to buy. We just have to figure out how to make that deal happen. So here's how I would probably structure this deal. If I were representing Barbara, I'd go to Barbara and say, look, Barbara, you need to pay Saul the full asking price of his house. I know he's asking $100,000, and I know that you want to negotiate the price, but when you're buying a house with seller financing, rather than negotiate the price, you want to negotiate the terms. That's the real secret of getting a property with seller financing. You really need to understand that. Forget about the price. I've even paid more than the seller's asking price in situations like this. Like in this situation, I might have even offered $110,000 or $105,000 if he would be willing to carry paper. So I would explain to Barbara that what we're going to do is we're going to approach Sam. He's going to take your $10,000 as a down payment, and then you're going to give him a $90,000 IOU. The same thing you would have had to give to the bank. They're going to take an IOU as well. That IOU is called a promissory note, right? That's what I like to invest in. So here's how it's going to break down. Saul says, you know what? I can do that. It works for me. I'll take your $10,000 and I will also carry back a $90,000 IOU at 8.5% interest for 12 years. And that gives Saul $1,000 a month cash flow from Barbara. So Saul's going to get $10,000 now, and he's going to collect $1,000 a month for the next 12 years. And he can live with that. That works for him for a number of reasons. The number one reason is that he needs to get his house sold. Maybe he has a job transfer. He's got to move to another state, and he doesn't want to have a rental property 2,000 miles away from where he is currently residing, right? Things like that happen every day. So let's look at Saul's numbers. Here's what happened. Saul collects $10,000 right now, and over the next 12 years, Saul will collect 144 payments of $1,000. That's $144,000. All in, Saul is going to have $154,000. Now remember, he was only asking $100,000 for his house. Here's a way that Saul can leverage his own equity to create a situation where he can actually make an extra $54,000 on the sale of his house. That's pretty hot, huh? I think that's pretty darn good. You know, when you're talking to real estate agents who aren't familiar with how to do this kind of stuff, they'll tell you, oh, this seller needs all his money. Well, sometimes the sellers need all their money. Sometimes they don't. Realtors don't ever ask the question. So I just like to go to the seller and say, hey, when you do sell your house for $100,000, Saul, what are you going to do with the money? And if he says, well, I'm going to put it down on another house, that might be an option. But if we can show him how he can actually earn 8.5% on that money, if he can borrow money on a new house at 5% and he can leave his $90,000 working at 8.5%, he can actually earn a 3.5% spread. Does that make sense? Banks do that every day, don't they? They borrow money at one rate, and then they loan their money out at a higher rate, and they earn the spread. They do that with your money that you have sitting in your checking account right now. You guys know what that's called? If you know what that's called, type that into comments for me. I'll tell you right now, though, there's a name for it, and people get wealthy doing it. It's called arbitrage. Arbitrage. And that's what we can show Saul that he can do with his own money. He can actually let his money go to work for him. Okay? So in that instance right there, Saul created his own note, didn't he? With seller financing. He didn't go out and invest in a note. He didn't go out and buy a note. He created a note. And he got paid. He got his house sold. He was able to make his move and do all the things that he needed to do. It's a good situation for him. And it should be a good situation for Barbara. Let's take a look a little bit more at how this shakes out for Saul, though. Saul is earning 8.5% on his money, which is good. Now, Barbara, what's in it for Barbara? In Barbara's case, she couldn't get financed right now. That was the problem, but she was sick and tired of paying rent. And she wanted to do something where she could become a homeowner. So here's an opportunity for her to avoid the banks so she doesn't fit in the box. The beauty of seller financing is that you, as a buyer, whether you're an investor or an occupant, you help create the box. And then you present the box to the seller and you say, here's the box. Now, I fit into this box. If this works for you, Mr. Saul, then we can do business and I'll buy your house right now. I mean, you don't have to ask permission. You don't have to beg. You literally say, this is a win for you, as we just saw for Saul. He gets a chance to earn $154,000 on his property as opposed to $100,000. And he get a chance to sell it right now. And Barbara gets to avoid the bank and all the hoops that they're going to make her jump through. The other thing is this. It fits her budget, right? She had $10,000 and she could afford $1,000 a month. So this fits her budget. Sometimes when people buy houses, and I've sold plenty of houses over my 39-year career as a real estate broker, it's not unusual for people to go beyond their budget. You know, people come to me and they say, well, I want to buy a house. I can afford, $1,800 a month. It's not unusual to see those people buy a house where they're actually paying $2,100, $2,200, $2,300 a month just to get in. I mean, it happens all the time. As a matter of fact, as a general rule, I see people pay about 25% more than they thought they wanted to pay the first time they talked to me. And I think a lot of realtors will share that kind of result with you. We typically see people pay more when they finally buy a house, then they said they wanted to pay the first day they walked in the front door to look at a house. So this is a way that Barbara can get a house that actually fits her budget. I mean, it's really a smart way to buy if you can make the deal work. The third thing is she can stop renting. Because think about this, Barbara is paying $1,000 a month for rent. So if she continues to rent for the next 15 years or 12 years in our example, she's going to pay $144,000 in rent. And what does she own? Nothing. And that's if they don't raise her rent, right? Now, we know over the next 12 years, it's pretty likely that the landlord's going to raise her rent at least once over 12 years. There are a few landlords out there who never raise rent, but they're the exception. They are certainly not the rule, right? So keep that in mind. So she gets to stop renting. She gets some pride of ownership, and she can start building equity. And I mean, it's just a wonderful situation for her. And get this, when she wrote this note to buy this house, she did this to all fit within her budget. She avoided the bank, she stopped renting, and she did it for 12 years. Now, if you know, most banks will write your mortgage for how long? Right? 30 years. They want you to pay for 30 years. Why does the bank want you to pay for 30 years? Because they want to collect payments for 30 years. That's why. That's why they do that. But here, we were able to structure this note that in 12 years, Barbara owns this house free and clear. Now, it doesn't matter if she moves into this house or if she's going to put a tenant into this house. Maybe this is a house that she can actually rent out for $1,500 a month. She's only paying $1,000 a month. So she can make a $500 a month positive cash flow as an investor. And this is exactly how I bought 28 properties in the 80s that I held on to. I bought more than that, but some of them I sold them right away. But I held on to 28 of them until I was ready to leave Chicago and move to California. Then I sold them all. So guys, I'm just telling you, this is such a smart way to buy real estate. You don't have to worry about qualifying for the banks. And by the way, when you're an investor and you're trying to buy real estate, sometimes banks will shut you down like they did me. You know, I did buy some properties with mortgages, but at some point I was notified by the bank they weren't going to give me any more mortgages. And even to this day, Fannie Mae has guidelines that say after you have a certain number of mortgages, and I don't know that number, but I think it could be somewhere between 6 and 10. But after you have a certain number of mortgages, you can't get another mortgage through the Fannie Mae system, which is basically conventional financing, right? So, I mean, it's kind of tough. Plus, they want 30% down when you're an investor. I mean, it's just tough. So, guys, I'm telling you, this is a great way to buy real estate. And as you can see, this works out well for both the buyer and for the seller. And that's what we're always looking for. So now let me tell you how we structure these deals. Seller finance deals are typically structured in 3 different ways. There are maybe some other ways to do it, but these are the 3 primary ways that I have structured my seller finance deals. Either a contract for deed, a lease option, or a subject to. So those are the 3 ways that I like to structure the deals. And I'm going to talk about each of those here in just a minute. But for right now, I want to ask you guys real quick, who thinks this is a very cool way to invest in real estate? If you think this is a cool way to invest in real estate, give me a thumbs up emoji or something. All right. So let's do this. Let's look at contract for deed. A contract for deed. Here's what that is. A contract for deed is a contract between the buyer and the seller, where the seller says to the buyer, I will finance you and you can pay me back in this instance over the next 12 years. That's totally cool with me. But what I'm going to do is I'm not going to transfer the actual deed to your name until you have paid me in full. In other words, we have a contract for deed. We will transfer something called equitable title, just not actual title. Now, equitable title gives Barbara the opportunity to get the tax write-offs, just like she had actual title. She gets the same tax deductions. You know, she gets to deduct the interest that she's paying to Saul. She also gets the appreciation on the property, just as the same. It's just that the deed isn't going into her name. She also will have homeowners insurance listing her as the owner. Her name gets recorded in the county where the property is located. I mean, everything happens except Sam doesn't deliver the deed into her hand until he is paid in full. So that's how a contract for deed works. And that's how I've structured most of my seller finance transactions. Although I do see a lot of people that structure them this way, as a lease option. Lease options are a great way for people to pick up real estate and for the seller to keep ownership interest in the property. What it does is it literally ties up the property so that the seller cannot sell to anyone else. Generally speaking, it fixes the price and it gives a certain amount of time for the buyer to get financing to buy the property at that price. So even if the property has gone up in value, if it's a lease option, the buyer gets the original price. But here's the beauty of a lease option. If the property goes down in value, the buyer does not have to buy. They can walk away. And by the way, I had that happen to me. When I came out here to California, one of the townhomes that I bought in San Diego, I bought it on a lease option where we had a price of, I think it was around $200,000 for this townhome. And the way appreciation was happening, we figured that place would be worth about $225,000 after 3 years when our lease option came to maturity. In other words, we had to go get a mortgage to pay it off. Well, at the time that we went to get that mortgage, it turns out the property would only appraise for about $175,000 because the market had started to go down. And so I could have gotten a mortgage, but since I owed the seller, I believe it was 200, might have been 195, but whatever. I owed the seller around 200,000. I would have had to pay the difference in cash. And so I literally just did not exercise my option and I walked away. So it gives me the upside protection against an increase in price, and it gives me the downside protection that if the market goes sideways or backwards, I can change my mind and I don't have to perform. That's a pretty cool way to do it too. But the problem with lease options is you don't get equitable title. You don't get the tax, right? So if you want the tax deduction, but here's one thing that does up in value, and it was worth $225,000, but I had an option to buy it for $200,000. Could I sell my position to someone else? You darn right I could. As a matter of fact, I could literally list that house for sale for $225,000. Have a realtor sell it, find a buyer to pay me $225,000. Then take that $225,000, pay the $200,000 to the seller, pay my agent their $12,000 or $10,000, whatever their fee is, and put the difference in my pocket and go buy another house. I have that as an option. So lease options are very, very powerful. Any type of an option is a very powerful way to control real estate without actually owning it. So a lot of people do use lease option, and I certainly have used my share of lease options too. And the third way that I have done many real estate deals, and I've taught many real estate agents to do this as well, is this way. It's called subject to. So let's go back to Saul and Barbara. So let's just say that Barbara says to Saul, hey, I'll give you $10,000 down and I'll take over your payments and I'll pay you $1,000 a month for 12 years. And Saul says, I would love to do that, but I have a mortgage on my house. He says, I owe $60,000 on my house and my mortgage payments are $500 a month. So I can't sell you my house that way. Well, the truth is you can. Barbara can agree to buy the house from Saul subject to Sam's existing $60,000 mortgage. So here's how that would play out. Every month, Barbara would send Sam $1,000. Sam would take $500 out of that $1,000 and pay the mortgage that is underlying, and then he puts the other $500 in his pocket. That's how the subject to payments would work. The risk for Barbara is that if she pays Sam $1,000 and he doesn't pay the underlying mortgage, then the bank can foreclose on Sam, which forces her to lose her interest in the property too. And so when I structure those deals, we make sure we cover ourselves with paperwork and with something like a property manager handling the cash and making the mortgage payments and then sending Sam the difference. But it can be fixed. You just need to know that that is an issue. Another issue that could happen is Sam's existing mortgage company could say, hey, we don't like the fact that you sold your house to Barbara. We did a deal with you. And they can do something called calling the mortgage. That's where they reach out to Sam. I keep saying Sam. I'm sorry. His name is Saul. Boy, oh boy. Sucks getting old. Anyway, they reach out to Saul and they say, Saul, tell you what. We want you to pay us off. We don't care that you sold your house, but you owe us $60,000. We want all $60,000 right now. That can happen. But I can tell you this, in 38, 39 years, I've never seen it happen. I've never even heard of it happening, because for the most part, as long as that mortgage company or bank is getting their $500 every month on time, they don't care really what's going on. All they want is their cash flow. Now, let me tell you this too. I personally am a note holder, and I feel exactly the same way. I'm a lender where people owe me money. Send me my payment. We got no problems. Okay? That's just how I feel about it. You don't send me my payment, I'm going to take the house, and I don't care about your deal with Barbara, right? So I just want you guys to understand that's how that works. So subject to. It's a great way to buy properties too. So here's what I like to wrap this up with. Buying property this way is good for the buyers because they can buy more properties. That's one of the things they can do when they buy properties this way. They can also, let's see here. There you go. They can close faster. And what I mean by that is we don't have to jump through all the hoops that banks want you to do. So it doesn't take 30 or 45 or 60 days to close these deals. These deals can close in 7 to 10 days. How long does it take to get a title report? About 5 days, right? That's all we really need to know is we need to know that the title is clear. We need to know taxes are paid and all that stuff's on the title report. The buyer gets homeowner's insurance on the property. They give their money to the seller and they're done. The deal transfers. They do the paperwork to transfer the deal, whether it's a lease option, whether it's a contract for deed or subject to. You have an attorney draft the paperwork. That takes a day or two, and you move on and you close. There's a lot less paperwork, too. If you've ever purchased a house, you know there's a ton of paperwork that the banks have you sign. Well, a lot of that has to do with the fact that the bank is trying to sell your mortgage on the secondary market to Fannie Mae or to Freddie Mac or to Ginnie Mae or someplace. And they just have all these requirements. Well, when it's between the buyer and the seller, Saul and Barbara, we don't have all that junk, right? There's some disclosures that the state of California might require, but it's probably about 1/3 of the amount of paperwork that's typically done on a typical transaction. There's also a lower down payment. I have purchased these properties this way, literally with $0 down. I have done it with $10 down. I have done it with $5,000 down, and I've done it with $20,000 down. It really is a negotiated item. Saul may have done this deal with Barbara if she only gave him $5,000. We don't know. She offered him $10,000 and he took it. He may have done it with $5,000 and a little bit higher monthly payment. That's always an option. So you can do those kinds of things. You can even go, as I said, with $0 down. The other thing that's interesting about this type of financing is this. I have been involved in hundreds of these transactions for myself, for my clients, and also for 8 real estate agents that worked for my Century 21 franchise. Hundreds of these transactions, and that's no exaggeration. And I can only remember maybe 10 times, 8 times that I've ever heard anyone even ask about the buyer's credit. It just doesn't come up as an issue, right? The sellers don't ask that. So even if you have some bad credit, you can still buy real estate this way. So that's really a real plus for the buyer as well. So now I'm going to share with you something I call my ninja strategy for the buyer. Okay? Think about this. The buyer has made their payments on time for, let's just say, I don't know, 3 years, 4 years, whatever. And then they realize, okay, I can go and get a mortgage now. I'm paying 8.5 to Sam, but I can go and get a mortgage, maybe a 15-year mortgage at a bank, and I can get my interest rate at 6%. So the buyer can get a lower interest rate. And so the buyer says to Saul, not Sam, the buyer says to Saul, look, I owe you, let's say, I started off owing you 90,000. Now I owe you 85. Now I owe you 80,000. Would you take 75,000 right now if I could pay you off? Saul might say yes. He might say, you know what, I could use 75,000 right now. And if that's the case, the buyer goes out, gets financing for $75,000 and just literally picked up $5,000 more in equity on a house that, in this case, Barbara bought with very, very little down. I know, Beth. Thank you very much. You know what I think I'm going to do? I'm going to put Saul on the screen. That way I know. Saul. I don't know why I say Sam. I got Sam on the brain, I guess. So that's a ninja strategy that you can use when you are the buyer. And you can go to the seller and say, hey, if I could pay you off now, would you take a hit on what I owe you? It's not unusual for people to say yes. That's called discounting the note. Okay? So let's look at it from Sam's perspective, and then we'll wrap this up. Sam got a faster sale, didn't he? He didn't have to wait until somebody could qualify for financing. He had somebody and he qualified them. Done deal. He can get a higher price. Remember this, most properties don't sell for the asking price. When you look over time, there's some markets where properties sell for more than the asking price, but over time, most properties sell between 3 to 5% below the seller's asking price. Well, with seller financing, properties sell at or above their asking price. Buyers that know they can't get financed at a bank, or buyers who can get financed at a bank, but who choose seller financing, understand that that is a premium and a tremendous benefit to them, and they are willing to pay full price and sometimes even higher than full price for the property. You can get a faster closing. Doesn't take 35, 45, 60 days to close these deals. As I said before, you can close it in a week and you can move on. So if you need this deal done, this is a great way to get it done. You can have lower closing costs because you don't have to try and satisfy Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and all those FHA and all those people. You don't have to pay all those closing costs. So what would normally cost a seller, maybe $4,000 or $5,000 to close the deal, might only cost them $2,000 or $1,500 to close this deal. So they save money there. It's really a good way to do it. There's a lot less paperwork, a lot less hassle. It's just a clean way to do business. And here's a big one for a lot of sellers. If a seller is selling a property that they have held as a rental for a while, and now they're moving out of that space, they may be subject to capital gains tax. And if Saul were to sell this place for $100,000 and then collect the entire $100,000 at once, he's going to likely have to pay some sort of a capital gains tax. Now, I'm not giving tax advice and I'm not a tax expert, but let's just say if it's 20%, he'd have to send out of that $100,000, $20,000 of it goes to the government. Well, he can avoid that tax, that $20,000 hit, by doing this with seller financing. You see, he would only have to pay taxes. This is my understanding. This is certainly how it was in the past. You can check with a tax expert now. But my understanding is that you only pay taxes on what you receive. So he received $10,000. He might have to pay, that 20% tax on that. And if he receives $1,000 a month, he may have to pay a 20% tax on a part of that. So it's a much better way to manage the tax liability. And here's the final point. If something happens to Saul and he winds up, leaving this planet sooner than he had expected, maybe during this 12-year period, right? His heirs will be able to just step into his shoes and collect that $1,000 a month. And trust me, they won't have a problem with that, okay? They're going to be quite all right with that. And one more thing that Saul can do is he can sell that note for cash if he wanted to cash out. As I said, he could also just take a reduction on what he owes to the to Barbara. But if he wants to sell the note, we'll buy it. That's what we do. So let's look at this after 5 years. If after 5 years, Saul decides to sell that note, after 5 years, Barbara would still owe him $63,000. Okay, because most of the payment she makes at the very beginning is interest, not principal, right? We all know that. So after 5 years, here's how his financial picture would look. He collected $10,000 at the time they bought the property, and he collected $1,000 a month for 5 years, which is another $60,000. So he has received $70,000 in cash on his house so far, and he is still owed $63,000, right? So if he were to sell that note, I would buy that note all day long for $53,000. He's owed 63, I would offer him 53, and that would be a good deal for me. If he took that note at $53,000, add that to the $70,000 he's already collected, in 5 years, Sam will have collected $123,000 on his $100,000 house. That's a good deal for Sam, don't you think? And here's what I want you guys to know, guys. We buy notes. So if you have a note that you want to sell, or if you know someone that has a note they want to sell, simply send it over to our trade desk, and we will give you a price within about 24 hours or so. We pay cash, we can close fast, and we pay top dollar for that, for your assets and the notes that you want to sell. Our email address is tradedesk@americold.com. Just send them over. We'll get back with you with a price. Give us your contact information. We'll call you. We also sell notes. We sell notes for people that want to have passive cash flow. I'll tell you who are good candidates for this. People who are landlords. I've spoken to several landlords just in the past 10 days or so who have said to me, you know, I thought being a landlord was going to be passive income, but it's not. What they find out is that being a landlord is another job. Literally, it's another job. So now they have their full-time job as an engineer or a teacher or a nurse or whatever, and they have their part-time job and spend their weekends dealing with their rental houses, and they have a part-time job there. And that wasn't the idea. They thought they were just going to collect rent and have wonderful tenants who never complained, who always paid their rent on time, and all that was going to happen. Well, guess what? That's not the reality of the world. But if you buy a cash flow note, you don't have all those headaches. It's a wonderful way to invest. So I've been showing people how they can get rid of their rental properties and how they can replace those with cash flow notes, and they can actually put more money in their pocket, sleep better at night, and have a better quality of life because they're not landlords. It just makes way more sense. If you'd like to learn more about what we do and how we do it, what I'm going to suggest to you is that you visit our website. It's called investbrilliantly.com. And on that site, you can learn all about investing in notes. You can see deals that we've done in the past. You can have access to notes that we have available right now. And you can have all of our contact information is right there, investbrilliantly.com. Join us on our Facebook, like our Facebook page. It's called facebook.com/successfulinvesting. Go there, like our page, keep up with us. You can see the deals that we have there too. You can learn more. I put up educational videos all the time. My goal is to put up at least one video a week. Most weeks these days, I'm able to put up 2. And at some point, I hope to be able to do like 2 or 3 videos every week on different ways to make money and passive cash flow with mortgage notes and cash flow real estate. You can also join our Facebook group. It is Cash Flow Mortgage Note Buyers. Literally, just go to Facebook, go to your Facebook page and do a search for groups and type in Cash Flow Mortgage Note Buyers, and you will be taken to our page where you can apply to join. Answer the questions that we have there. If you don't answer the questions, we're likely not going to let you in the group. It is a closed group, and we can do business inside that group, right? Buy and sell notes. You get first access to things that we have for sale. I mean, it's just really good. And you also get to interact with other people that are in the space, and you can learn things and share ideas and share your own experiences. Check out my YouTube channel as well. It's youtube.com/C/Desi1. I don't know what the C is for. Maybe it stands for channel. I don't know. But it's Desi1. Go there, check it out. That's it, guys. Investbrilliantly.com. I'm Desi Arnaz, your host of this week's show, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week as we cover another interesting topic about investing for cash flow. Thank you very much.